Reggie, we're going to talk a lot about your journey here because it has now gotten to the point where you made your very first investment. Your very first rental property with JWB is something that you accomplished just in January of this year. There's a few folks out there in the world that don't know the Reggie Faunce story. Why don't you bring everybody up to speed, who you are, where you're from, what you've been doing, and then maybe your journey towards your first investment with JWB.
Well, just to give you a little bit, I actually was born on the East Coast, Maine, graduated, went to Miami, 3 years construction. After that, joined the Navy, brought me out to San Diego, served 4 years, and then applied to the California Highway Patrol. In 2015, where my journey kind of began, is my mom was renting, and across the street, she knew this two-story building that was in really good shape. That the lady downstairs cut hair. She had a separate room set up for a salon, and she said, "Boy, I really would like to live there." So I said, "Well, Mom," I said, "let's look into it." And putting the house under her name, we only had to come up with 3% down. So with
Mm,
doing that, I came up with that money for her, and I bought her first home under her name. The plan
very
was
cool.
eventually down the road, which I thought was going to be longer than it would go, is to be able to turn it into my first rental. And this was before I retired in 2016. In 2017, I joined Fortune Builders and started learning about real estate. I joined Fortune Builders, started educating myself on basically my next journey because I was retired now, had a pension, didn't have to work, but I've always loved construction. I always loved real estate. And I always knew that real estate's a really good place to go because people are always going to need a place to live. There's always going to be a need for renters. I guess one of the biggest things, Greg, was that the hardest part was sitting down, taking that first step. You're sitting there looking, man, where am I going to get that extra money to go? You just didn't want to
Right,
go. Where do I get
right.
it? So education is what helped me get to the point where I am today is by sitting there and learning about how we can use our equity, your retirement, your 401ks and things like that.
And you used a special technique of doing that called a 1031. Can you explain to everybody what you did and what a 1031 is?
That's one of the things I had learned educating about 1031. And like I said, I was on the show here for a couple of years. I believe you had a guest on too that talked about the 1031s, and that's the company that I ended up going with. Uh,
Yes.
I knew what it was, and I didn't know how to use it, but they helped me very easily go through that. So if you ever have a chance to do a 1031 and use them, I learned a lot about it to where you got to make sure that a 1031 company is involved because that money when you sell, you can't touch your hand on it. If you touch your hand on it, which Leslie, she had mentioned where she had done that and put it in her account first and then wanted to do the 1031, but ended up paying taxes on it because
Right.
so once you touch the money, it's done. So you want to follow the 1031 example there of letting them take the money and then they move the money from their account into the new purchase with, in my case, was JWB.
Exactly right. For those who aren't familiar with what a 1031 exchange is, if you have a property in another market that maybe isn't as advantaged for owning rental properties as Jacksonville is, or it might just not be the right situation in the other market for the rental property that you own. Whatever it may be, you might have a ton of equity in that property. And a 1031 exchange is a way that you can basically, in a tax advantaged way, take all of that equity, all of that gain that you have, and then go and buy multiple additional rental properties in the right market with the right team. That could be Jacksonville with JWB, of course. And what you can do is bring all of that money that you make on the sale and not have to pay taxes at the time of sale. But you have to use a very special design process and it has to be followed to a T. So if anybody is interested in using a 1031 exchange, just reach out to JWB. We're happy to make a referral for you to a company that we use, which is the same one that Reggie used. It's
Yes.
IPX 1031 exchange. The 1031 exchange, a wonderful tool to be able to buy that first rental property. Now, if you, Reggie, with your education, you had some different options. You could have done the fix and flip model, or you could have done the buy and hold model. You could have done any other model in real estate, but you chose specifically single family homes, buying and holding. Can you talk about that decision to focus specifically on buying and holding single family and why that was right for you?
One of the things I realized is I always kept saying, man, I don't have the money to buy a house and to fix it. And while they say, go get other people's money. And be honest with you, I used to be very shy and it was hard for me to go up and talk to people and tell them why you want to, invest your money and to make money with me. it's the toughest thing. And
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons I didn't jump into that. And when I started changing my focus over to buy and hold, I sat down, I said, well, you know what? I says, this way here, you're kind of like, you're not into that part where you're finding people. You've got a great company like JWB that sits down and brings the properties to you. And even if you do find one that you think is good enough to buy and hold, and you decide to buy it yourself and it's in Jacksonville, you guys have the wonderful program over there where you guys will property manage it for us if we're clients of yours. And that's the other thing that I liked about JWB is like, so if I ever go over there, I've got other options with you. But the buying and hold, I sat there and focused on that because at this stage of my life, I'm sitting there saying, okay, it'd be nice to have extra income coming in, which is always a wonderful thing, right? We all can use the extra money to be able to take trips and stuff like that. But I've been seeing the way the world is and how hard it is. And I've seen my youngest at 25 apply for job over and over and over and over again and just nobody hiring. And it's like, what are they going to do? Right. So I said, what's the best way to help them out is by buying properties, holding those properties. I've already created a trust. So therefore, when I go, this all becomes the kids. And I'm trying to teach them on, hey, you got to do it the right way. And you got to learn how to do this so that when I leave it to you guys, I says, you don't go sell it all, pay taxes, and spend what little you get left over because the government likes their part. And I says, you got to learn to keep it in the business and pass it on down to your kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids down the road. Even if I never see them, I said, I'd still like to see. This is a time where this part of the Faunce family needs to change our way of living. We got to sit down and set up our kids and grandkids with the ability to have a better life, depending on where this world goes.
Yeah.
That's my main goal and the reason why I started focusing more on this. I wish I'd have started this a long time ago because I can imagine where I'd be right now. I'd probably be one of those, as we saw at the summit, they're getting their rewards for having 10 properties with you guys. So I plan on getting there before I go because I don't plan on dying until my 90s or 100s. I'm going to beat that 80 threshold. Everybody seems to believe.
I think you're going to be on stage getting a reward in due time. No doubt in my mind, for sure. All right, Reggie, I want to hear this 3 to 5 year plan. I think this is really cool kind of culmination of everything you have learned and educated yourself on and then done as far as acquiring rental properties. Help us understand where you're going to be in 3 to 5 years.
My plan was being out here in California. I got a VA on my home here. So the only way you can get your VA back, because I've been listening to a couple of shows or with veterans there on how to use your money and stuff. And I was trying to think, how can I do this and use my VA to make me money instead of just the home I live in? I can always go out and get a conventional for my own home if I buy something else. And my wife and I actually just talked about, well, why buy a house on the ground? Why don't we put it on 4 wheels? We can come back here, visit, and we got a place to stay. We go over there, we can stay. So as I mentioned to you, Gregg, earlier, my plan is when I sell my VA here, I want to use it to make me money. Not necessarily just for me to live, but we also know if you use your VA, whatever you buy, you have to move in there within 30 days and you have to live in it. Now, I was researching that, and according to the VA rules, it doesn't say there's a time limit on how long you have to live there. But all real estate agents say, and business people that loan money want you to stay there if they give you a loan for a year. So I said, okay, how can I do this to where I don't have to live in the house? And then I was thinking, hey, how about a 4-plex? I can live in one, rent the other 3 out. And then you corrected me because I was informed there that possibly they wouldn't property manage it for me if I still lived in it. So I says, okay, well, I'm not going to let that stop me. So I kept looking and I says, I always thought about this. What about my first property that I buy when I sell this place is a property that has 2 homes, like a guest home in the back that's separated and a front home. I says, I don't need a big living space because we're going to be on the move a lot. I make that foundation of my home in the back. I've got my VA obligation. I live there, and then have JWB rent out the front home, which will bring me more money. Rent that out. I says, then with my VA eligibility that I got left, take money, whatever I need to put down. Because we know on a VA, I don't have to put anything down on the first purchase. But depending on how, the money on that, what's my eligibility left? and then go buy a fourplex with it as well. So
Hmm.
that they'll let you buy a second property. So if I get that fourplex, now I've got four properties bringing me extra money that goes into the pot of buying those baby properties down the road, as everybody
Hmm.
talks about. So I
Hmm.
sit there. I said, you know what? I said, this is the plan. This is my 3 to 5 year plan. And then with the money I make off the house I sell, because I haven't even told you I touched that yet, that'll be, I'll use some of that to get our house on wheels, and the rest of it, there'll be enough there to go buy another JWB single family home, which will add to it. So hopefully within 3 to 5 years, I'll go from the first one I bought in January to another one that I buy, a fourplex I buy, and another JWB property to add to that, and creating more wealth to where I can sit down and buy more. And hopefully, by the time I hit 70, I'll be with all those other wonderful folks I've met, and end up having 10 properties and getting up on stage, say, yeah, I
There
got
you
10.
go. There you go. Well, I'm sure it's going to happen. I mean, so what you're talking about, a lot of people would call house hacking, right? The ability to buy either a two-unit property or a duplex
Right.
or a quadruplex and live in one of the units. And it is a wonderful strategy to be able to do. But what you're doing is house hacking on steroids because you're using the power of your VA loan.
Right.
And you got to follow all the rules with the VA. Make sure you check all the rules because you have to do it the right way. But when you have that, you have this incredible wealth building tool. That's what the VA is. That's why we do it to serve those who have served us. A plan like this doesn't just come to fruition just because you listen
No,
to one show or a podcast. It's
no.
because you've been dedicating yourself and you're surrounded by other people who are doing versions of your same plan. And then you start to make connections. You're like, oh, okay, wait, no, I can do this and this and this. And then that's when things start to really get fun. So
Right.
really, I'm proud of you. And then I think of a lot of similarities between your plan and Pablo's plan.
Right.
Pablo did a version of your plan. He is house hacking right now. He owns a duplex, and one side is rented out, and one side he lives in, and
Right.
he's doing that in addition to growing his JWB portfolio. So you guys are doing that, and for any of you who are interested in continuing to grow your portfolio, house hacking can be a great way to do it. JWB manages properties for folks that don't actually buy the home with us. About a quarter of all the homes we manage are actually from investors who didn't purchase the home with us. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're house hacking or you have other rental properties and you'd like us to manage those, again, reach out to the team. Be happy to look at that for you.